Hi guys, welcome to the Dad Bub Show. I'm one of your hosts, Ken Blowfield, and Brendo and I, we interview dads all over the world to find out their secrets on balancing how to be a high-performing dad and a high performer in life too. So without further ado, let's get into the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today on the Dad Bub Show, we have another amazing person. It's Nick Freitas. Now, my name is Ken. I'm your host here at Dad Bub, and today we're going to interview Nick to talk all things being a dad, being a husband, obviously being part of the Green Beret and a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. So, let me introduce you to our guest today. So, Nick Freitas, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a Green Beret veteran. If anyone is not familiar with that, that is the elite of the elite in the Army military in the US. And he's the host of Making the Argument with Nick Freitas and the Y Minutes. So you check all of them out on the major platforms, including YouTube, Spotify, and all the greats. So again, if you don't know of the Green Beret is the elite of the Army military group in the US and revered as one of the toughest military forces around the world. Just to be a part of such a group is an amazing privilege, honor, and testament to, obviously, Nick's character. And then to end that area of his life and move into politics to stand up for one's beliefs and the beliefs of the people, it's a greater testament to his service to himself, his family, and his country. So on today's show, we're going to dive into Nick's life, how he's became who he is, how he became, what he is, and how his past has potentially shaped his life as a father, husband, and family man. Now, Nick, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It was a little bit stuttery. I was at 6 a.m. over here, so I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to go. I haven't had a coffee yet, so I see you're drinking a cup of Joe.
I am definitely my fuel.
Exactly. So, Nick, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into being a Green Beret, and how do you potentially think that's affected you in your life now?
Well, so my mom and dad actually got divorced when I was 3, and my dad lived in Southern California. My mom lived in Northern California. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a homicide detective with the LAPD. And so in both cases, I was working with people that were doing jobs in that sort of service. For my dad, doing a job kind of obviously in a dangerous environment within LA. And so I was always interested in joining the military. Didn't necessarily think I'd be a Green Beret, but joined as infantry. So I was a paratrooper at the 82nd Airborne when I first started. This was in 1998. I actually got married to my high school sweetheart less than a year into the military. So we got married in 99. And I was actually going to get out of the military. So it was 2000. I'd had a chance to go through, airborne school, air assault school, sniper school, ranger school. So I got to knock out a lot of these schools, and I was liking it. And I was trying to get into Kosovo because that was the only thing that was going on in the world at that particular time in the military was Kosovo. And my sergeant major comes in. He goes, "Nick, we've sent you to all these schools. I'm not letting you leave to go to a different unit." And so I was tempted at that point just to get out of the service because I didn't want to. I mean, I like being in the military, but peacetime military can get a little bit boring. And I was going to go be a cop. I was going to go be a cop with my dad. And my wife and I talked about it. Decided, you know what? We really haven't planned on getting out. Let's reenlist one more time. So we reenlist, go to Hawaii, great duty station. But 3 months after we get there, 9/11 happens.
Right.
And I look at Tina and I said, well, hon, if this unit doesn't deploy in 6 months, I'm going to go volunteer to be Special Forces because I know they'll send me. And so I went through the Special Forces qualification course. It's about a year and a half long. And got assigned to 1st Special Forces Group, did a couple tours over in Iraq. Interestingly enough, 1st Special Forces Group actually has an exchange program with the Australian SAS. Awesome. So we have Australian SAS guys that will come and join our team, and one of our Green Berets will come down and join an SAS team, and you deploy them. I didn't get to do that, unfortunately, but so that's what got me into SF. And then Tina and I, like I said, got married. I was 19 when I got married, and we had our first child in Hawaii, and then our next 2 over in Fort Lewis. We got into that deployment pregnancy cycle. Deploy, come home, get your wife pregnant, deploy. But yeah, and then so that was kind of our military career. It was about 11 years active duty, and really enjoyed it. But when it was time to leave, it was time to leave. And thankfully, my kids were still young. My oldest was 7 at the time, and so we had an opportunity to move out here to Virginia. Get a little piece of property out here, just a little 10 acres, little house. And it's been nice that, now my oldest is 19. So they've kind of had a chance to be able to grow up in the same neighborhood, same home, same little fields and creeks that they played in. And yeah, so that's the first half right there.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm going to touch on a couple of things because obviously the movement from, say, your military bases, maybe in Hawaii and whatnot, and the residential accommodation that you were staying in over there to where you are now in Virginia, that would be massively different, right? You're not living on a 10-acre property in Hawaii. I mean, if you live on a 10-acre property in Hawaii, you are a billionaire, right?
Yeah, you're doing pretty well. You're doing pretty well. No, when we first, I mean, that was the interesting part was when we first got married. Again, I was 19. She had just turned 20. We moved out to North Carolina. This was 1999. So I think I was bringing home about $1,200 a month. And then for the first couple of months, she was trying to get a job out there, and it took a while. So one of the things we learned right off the bat, being a young married couple with no money, was just, I mean, you really had to be careful on what you did, what you didn't do. I still remember those days of like going to the store and like you put in your card to pay and you're like, oh dear God, please let there be money in the account. But I wouldn't trade those early times together for anything. But yeah, you're right. We had to live either, the first place we lived in, it was a little apartment, like 400 square feet. It was called Lake in the Pines, but we all called it Lake in the Crimes because it was a dangerous area. And then in Hawaii, we were on base housing, which was, I mean, it was some old, pretty cruddy stuff. But again, we were both originally from California. So when we came out to Virginia and we found 10 acres with, not a huge house or anything like that, kind of but a good sized house. It was like a fraction of the cost of what, like a 2-bedroom apartment would be in certain parts of California. So, but it was nice. And we had both kind of realized too, that when we could finally pick where we wanted to live and raise our kids, it was important to us. Everybody has different preferences. It was important to us to be able to get something where we did have a little bit of property. We could, have some animals and stuff like that.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's really, really cool because you give that opportunity to your children that you probably wouldn't have been able to have raised in California, right? If you grew up in Cali, there really isn't any opportunity for farms or raising animals except maybe a dog or a cat.
Well, it's so where we were at was actually a huge agricultural area. So California is always thought of as like Southern California and like Silicon Valley and San Francisco, but it's actually one of the largest agricultural producing states in the country and really in the world. So like California produces like more rice than Japan does, right? So
wow.
So we grew up in a big farming community, but I didn't grow up on a farm. My wife kind of did. Her parents did some farming, and then my grandfather did a little bit. But it wasn't livestock. They were doing rice. We were doing that. So when we came out here, we're like, all right, we want chickens. We want goats. Next year, we'll probably do some cattle. But yeah, so there was opportunity to do it out in California, but we didn't really have that opportunity. And if we had moved back there on my salary at the time, we definitely would have had the opportunity. Yeah.
So I got to circle to that, right? So like $1,200 a month, is that a military salary?
Yeah, for being and that was more than, because I was airborne, and airborne gets a $300 a month stipend on top of your regular pay. Right. So when I was a private at PV2 in the Army, and so you got your base pay, you got your what was it? You got your basic allowance for housing. You got your separate rations because if you were married and living off post, they paid you extra to be able to go to the grocery store because you weren't eating at the chow hall. So that was kind of but $1,200 a month. That was the most you were making as a private in the military, and at that time.
So that's crazy. So what's it like now with the military? Are you aware in terms of like the payment procedures or the payments that the military personnel are getting?
Oh, well, yeah, it gets better over time. And the military, typically in the United States, they do a fairly good job of trying to keep military pay at a point where when you start to get married and have a family, you've got enough to live on. So by the time I got out, I was a sergeant first class, and in special forces, you got additional pay for that. There was a lot of tax exemption for certain things. So overall, if you were making, let's say $50,000 in the military a year, that was more of like the equivalent of 65, 70 in the private sector because your health care, because of tax exemption for BH, separate rats, and things like that. So, again, I mean, starting off as a private, you got to figure that's an entry level job. And, so, but again, I was a private in 99. By 2000, I think by 2005, I was a sergeant first class. And so I was, you can definitely live on your military salary.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I always ask because obviously when you look at militaries around the world, it's renowned for being not the most lucrative, but obviously you're joining for a service, right? Not for the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things the U.S. military prides itself on, and I believe the Australian military is the same way, is that we're a professional army, so we don't have conscription. A lot of armies around the world are conscripts, so a significant portion of their force is obligated under law to serve, sometimes 2 to 3 years. And in the United States, we're a purely professional military, so they do try to, maintain a pay rate that can allow you to actually survive on that. But yeah, you're right. You're definitely not going to get rich.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I look at the conscripts and I'm like, man, it would be really good. I always think if I was coming out of high school, because no one knows what they actually really want to do when they leave high school, and you really just go in, you fall into either a habit or a passion or something that you're good at. So it's like if you're good at sport, you do, physiotherapy or sports science, or maybe you do something in that kind of sporting field. If you have an interest in this or a passion in that, you'll go out and do that. And kids bum around a little bit in the bachelor's years of university, trying to work out and fumble around what the hell it is they want to do with their life. And if there was some sort of conscription, there's a couple of things that I think it would teach you. Number one, it would teach you amazing discipline, and how to kind of just get your life in order. But number two, it gives you time to just kind of work out what you want. But I haven't served, so I don't know what it's actually like. I'm just saying that it would be good to have a bit more discipline. I come from a broken family as well. When my mum and dad separated when I was young, so I didn't necessarily always have that fatherly figure to teach me, let's call it from the masculine right and wrong, and how to do specifically, again, let's call it quote unquote masculine based responsibilities and duties, right? I had my mother always there and she did her best, but of course she's a mum and trying to be the carer role, but didn't necessarily have someone who was always there in that protector role, which was supposed to be my father. Not to say that my dad wasn't around, he certainly was, but it was a phone call away because he was on the other side of the country. So it's just interesting because when I think about it, it's like I could have potentially learnt a lot if I had just joined the military. So how do you think potentially the military has shaped who you are now as a man? Like if you didn't join the military, do you think you'd be a remarkably different human?
I don't know. It's so difficult for me to imagine another course of action in my life where I didn't join the military. Because it said, even when I thought I was going to get out of the military early, I was going to go right into law enforcement. So it was kind of a similar backdrop. And again, a lot of that was the influence of my dad. And again, I got to see my dad probably like 3 to 4 months out of the year. But that still had a big impact on me. My dad and I are still, very close. I think that there was the number one thing that I was raised with that I think provided that foundational groundwork for, okay, what is a man supposed to be? What is a husband supposed to be? What is a father supposed to be? That was really my faith, right? That was, how I was raised, and that kind of provided the like objective moral framework for like do's and don'ts and what's expected of me. The military, I think, definitely helped on the discipline side because there's a number of things and a number of schools you go to, again, Ranger School, qualification course, and then going into combat. You're confronted with situations where they're difficult. There's not always a very good answer. Sometimes there's just the best of a bad decision, but you have to do it. And, Jocko talks about this, where he talks about extreme ownership, that idea of assuming responsibility for your, assuming responsibility for your actions. And, that was really important because there's so many things now that, like whether it's colloquialisms or things that I'll say or do, where someone will look at me strange, like, oh yeah, it's a military thing. So I do think it's valuable. It's certainly not the only way to learn those things or to learn that kind of discipline. But for me, it was beneficial because, like you said, if I had gone to college right out of high school, I would have just wasted time and money the first couple of years because I didn't really know what I wanted to do long term. And the military provided not only discipline and training and skill sets, and I'm very big on that with my own kids, right? Regardless of what you want to do, get skills that are marketable and that you can use, and also provide you a sense of meaning and purpose in what you're doing. So yeah, I loved my time in the military. There's times where I think, man, I should have done the full 20. But ultimately, like I said, I can't imagine a scenario where I didn't do it at all.
Yeah. And do you feel that, moving into the politics game, and I'm sure you probably had your own opinion of politics when you were serving in the military,
Yeah.
but do you do you feel that being in politics you can do more good now?
So I'll tell you an interesting story with that. First of all, somebody asked me, like, what in your life prepared you to get into politics? I said, well, when I was in the Army, I was specialized in unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency, and that did a lot to prepare me for domestic politics. But part of the reason I got involved, and I didn't think I'd get involved in elected office. I thought maybe I'd advise on policy and defense-oriented stuff and things of that nature. But I'll never forget, I had a sergeant major that I really respected, Sergeant Major Wynn. And he comes up and he's like, Nick, you're getting out at 11 years. What are you doing? And I look back and I said, well, Sergeant Major, I'm furious at the fact that we just got back from our second combat tour. We were wildly effective with respect to the mission sets that we were given. But there was so much bureaucracy in everything that we did that it was taking forever to get outside the wire, forever to execute targets, forever to do all this stuff. I said, it's garbage. And he goes, well, that's a BS answer, Freitas. If you see a problem, you stay in the military and you fix it. And I remember looking at him going, and SF is a lot more informal, person to person, professional, but informal in a lot of ways. I looked at him and I said, hey, Jerry, you're a sergeant major. How many problems have you been able to fix? And he looked at me like he was about to roundhouse kick me to the face. and he goes, all right, that's fair. I said, Sergeant Major, here's the problem. We're not the problem, right? The guys in uniform going out, doing the mission, doing what we're supposed to do, we're not the problem. The problem is all the people in DC or wherever else making decisions with no conception of what it is that we do or how we do it or what we need to do it effectively. Mm-hmm. I said, so, that's one area where I think I could be of some value. And then the other thing for me is I'm a very, very big believer, and this goes back to the whole extreme ownership thing. I really think the government does a disservice to a free people when they're constantly interfering and meddling in every single decision, right? The more the government tries to step in and take care of us all, the more they end up supplanting the role of, the husband, the wife, the father, the mother, the grandparents, the church, the synagogue, whatever it is. There's so many institutions that are important, I think, for fostering a society that believes in, individual liberty and, personal responsibility and being able to live your life the way you want, provided you're not infringing on the rights of others. And being in the military also gave me that exposure to a lot of other governments and systems all over the world. And one of the things that I was really determined about was not just the defense side. It was really this idea of, okay, like I've lost friends over here. I've lost friends and I've been to their funerals and I've watched their kids carry their flags. Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely no way I'm going to allow my country to turn in to the sort of environment that we were constantly going overseas and engaging in. Like that, what my friends gave everything up for was the idea that their kids were going to be able to find out what their purpose in life was and go and fulfill it without some political elite constantly intervening and interfering and telling them where to go and what to think and what to believe. And so that part was really important to me too. But yeah, that was kind of the process of transitioning from the military, going into politics, and some of the motivations that sent me there.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. And, so my perception of the military is really based on my friends who've been involved in the military. People I've been around during celebrations in relation to over in Australia. We have Anzac Day. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And that's and Remembrance Day, these types of events when we all congregate and gather together to remember those who fought for us and fought for our freedom, which is really beautiful. But my perception of the military is all shaped on that, and of course, the media, mm-hmm. right? So I don't actually have any first-hand experience. So if I ask a question and it offends you, I don't mean to offend, but here's a question that I want to know. Cool. So being in the military, orders are directed to you, right? There's no question as in this is the order, this is the I suppose task. Go out and complete the task. So with your sorry, go on. Yeah, maybe answer that one first.
Okay. So it depends, right? There are some. One thing I will say is that a lot of militaries that are more of like the conscript focused militaries are very big on the idea of, officer sitting down the order, you execute the order without question, line up, there you go.
Mhm.
One of the things I loved about Special Forces is that because we had gone through a lot of additional training, because we were typically like a little bit older, a little bit more mature, there was a lot more of coming together and actually going through the decision-making process and being a part of that decision-making process before you would go out and, again, execute targets or do, operations with indigenous forces. I mean, one day we could be going out and doing a raid to take down a terrorist. The next day we'd be going out to help with a civil affairs project where we're trying to bring a well to a particular area. And we got to be a part of that process of deciding what is the best course of action. And one of the things in the United States military, and that is unique from some militaries, Australia, I would say, is in this mode as well. There's actually a lot more emphasis put on the individual troops and the non-commissioned officers understanding why they're doing what they're doing and being a part of that overall process. So I think a lot of people's impression of the military is it's like basic training, right? People are just constantly yelling at you, screaming at you, get in line, go over here, do this, attack that hill, kill that guy, right? And it's not to say that there aren't certain times and moments where you have to follow your orders and go execute your mission, right? The debate's over, just go, or there's no debate at all. But there's actually a lot more, especially within the special operations community. There's a lot more of actually coming together and going through complex problem solving and thinking out of the box. And so that was my experience, at least.
Gotcha. Look, and that's kind of tied me into the direction that I wanted to go down, was how do you use what you learned from the military from a perspective of order, right? There's there's people of hierarchy with your own children today, and even as you were raising your children in the military, right? Again, there was a position of power, there was the hierarchy, and then there was a pecking order essentially.
Yeah.
And obviously in a family dynamic, it's mum and dad, and then there's the children. There's a pecking order. So was it blindless follow what I tell you to follow, or was there a discussion? How did you raise your kids essentially?
So this is interesting, and I always get a kick out of this. So when my kids were, like, people sometimes ask, "Do you spank?" Right? And in some cases they're like, "Well, of course." And in other cases, like, "Oh my gosh, you're a brute." And somebody was asking me about my philosophy on that once. I said, "Well, look, when my kids were really little, and I mean like 3 and under, 4 and under, when I couldn't always explain complex principles to them, if they were trying to touch a hot stove or go run and play in the street, I might give them a little swat." Nothing hard, but enough for them to associate running into the street with pain, because they're not in a position to understand the physics involved of you versus car equals, bloody spot on the road. Right. Yeah, exactly. But they could understand, okay, don't go out there because it hurts and I'll get in trouble. As they got older, I was very big on the idea of making sure that my kids understood why I was telling them to do what they needed to do. And there's a couple reasons for this. If you are teaching your kids the way I think you should, and that's the idea that there is such a thing as objective truth, there is such a thing as right and wrong. Some answers are better than others for various situations. Then they have to know that you actually believe that, but they have to understand it. Because if they don't understand logically why they shouldn't do some things or should do other things or whatever it is, then ultimately you're not actually teaching them to apply critical thinking and rest upon a good moral foundation. What you're actually doing is you're teaching them to obey authority. So if the only reason why your kids do what you're telling them to do is because they're afraid of punishment or they want reward, then again, you haven't taught them critical thinking. You've taught them to respect a particular power structure. And when you're no longer at the top of that power structure and it's somebody else, whether it be a boss or a professor or a captain or whatever it is, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they don't always have good answers for why they should do something or should not do something, because it's just obey so I don't get punished and I do get rewarded. And that creates a very, very weak society. I want my sons and daughters to be willing to stand up for what they believe, but they can't effectively do that unless I've equipped them emotionally, spiritually, intellectually to be able to do that. So I was very big on this idea that as they start to, as their cognitive ability develops, foster that, allow them to ask questions and engage in that dialogue. Now, there were still times where, I've got 3 kids and we're at Disneyland and it's busy and we're trying to get out. And it's just like, get in a line and follow me, right? We're not going to debate this. Just do it. But when I did have the time to explain to them why they should or should not do something, I took that time. And here's one of the most important things that I can say on this. inevitably there will come a point where you have taught your child something and they're going to approach you, and it'll probably happen in their teens, and they're going to approach you with something you did wrong, and they're going to be right. They're going to be right. And in that moment, every single ounce of you wants to be like, dude, I remember when I had to clean up your crap. Right now, you're coming here and you're lecturing me on something that I had to do in a split second, or a decision, or I was busy, or I was upset. The only thing I would say is that if your kid ever comes to you and they do it respectfully, there's a big difference between disrespectfully or respectfully. But if my child comes to me respectfully, and my oldest daughter did this when she was about 13, she goes, Daddy, I don't like the way, or she goes, Daddy, can I talk to you? So she asked for my attention. Yes, sweetheart, go ahead. She goes, I don't think you handled the situation downstairs very well. And I got mad at her brother and sister. The kitchen was a mess. I was upset about it. And she goes, Daddy, they were actually making you something and they had permission to do it. And you didn't find out what they were doing or why they were doing it before you got upset. And they're kind of like too embarrassed or ashamed to talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, gosh, dang. And what you got to remember is in that moment, if you're not willing to tell your child when they've got it right, when they have applied the lessons you have taught them correctly, but now it's directed at you. If you're not willing to look back at them and be like, you know what, sweetheart, you're right. I'm wrong. I'll go down. I'll talk to Allie and Luke. I'll apologize. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. If you're not willing to do that in that moment, what you've taught them is you didn't really believe it. You taught them this was a convenient thing to be used for controlling them, not an objective standard, which is supposed to be anybody can apply to. And so I really think that, and like there by the grace of God go I, right? I'm not claiming that I've always taken that response. I've definitely screwed up at times, a lot of times. But that was one where I'm very thankful in that moment because we both remember it. She remembered in that moment she could bring something to my attention. And as long as she could do it respectfully and she had a good argument and she could present her evidence and facts, that Daddy would admit he was wrong. And what that meant was as she was getting older and now you're going through stages of dating and all these other things where you want to be someone that your kids can come to, man, that starts early with laying that foundation. And again, when you're wrong, being able to admit it.
That's amazing. And that still goes back to the book Extreme Ownership, right? So it's like taking ownership. If you've taught your kids the right way on how to critically think and they're coming at you and they're questioning or challenging you respectfully, that's a good thing, right? Because, you don't want anyone to blindly follow orders. Obviously, in a military setting, in some situations, that's going to be an obvious requirement. But in the family dynamics, you don't typically want anyone to follow blindly. Even in society, you don't typically want people to follow blindly. You want people to follow with understanding.
Yeah.
And then, if they don't truly believe it, stand up for what they believe in, because that's why we're in a democracy in the first place. Right, the freedom to speak is so that you're in politics so that you can stand up for what you believe in, what your family believe in, and what you believe is in the best for the people. Right, and if you didn't do that, then we'd just be following the man upstairs that may not necessarily be the best person for the job. Yeah. Right, because we all vote in different times. Typically, not the right person for the job. I know in Australia we have many prime ministers that change all the time. And the Australian people are like, nope, we don't like you. Next one. Don't like you. Next one. So we're a very interesting political dynamic. But I'm sure you've got your own opinion on the American political system as well. Yeah. Believe me, I've seen some of your videos. So Nick, what's your strategy to raising great children then? I mean, you've obviously touched on critical thinking. You've obviously touched on having conversations with your children and obviously leading by example and obviously copying things on the chin, taking extreme ownership for yourself. But what's your success or what's your secret to raising great children who can think for themselves, who can stand on their own 2 feet, that doesn't need mummy and daddy support all the time? Of course, they know that you're there, but they can think for themselves, and you have complete faith if they're going out with dating boys or girls, they're going to make the right decision. Or if they're in the workplace and they're being mistreated, they're going to stand up for what they believe in. How have you been able to teach that? How do you think parents can teach their kids that same thing?
I mean, for me, and again, this some people don't like this, but I always go back to, again, my faith is very important to me, and it was very important to me to be able to convey that to my kids in a way that they could understand as well, because I do think that provides like an objective moral kind of code that you're living by and you're defending. Mm-hmm. And there's authority outside of just other people telling you what to do or giving their opinion. Part of it, I think, is providing, Jordan Peterson likes to say, when you've got to let your kids do dangerous things carefully. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of wisdom to that. There's a certain degree of, as your kids get a little bit older, a little bit more capable, a little bit more, cognitive, giving them responsibilities, I think, is really important. One of the big problems that we have in the U.S., I don't know if there's a problem in Australia, but we have some people that think that they just need to coddle their child all the time, or it's this self-esteem thing, right? Like, the most important thing is my child's self-esteem. No, the most important thing is that your child being a good human being that can actually, fulfill their responsibilities and have self-esteem because they make good choices, not because you've arbitrarily awarded it to them for being able to, stand upright and breathe in and out. And the whole participation trophy nonsense is just drives me nuts.
Don't get me started. Yeah, I lose my shit every single time. It's my nephews. They get it. They do well in their particular sports, but some particular sports they don't do well in. They get these participation trophies, and my mother-in-law and father are like, "Oh, congratulations!" I'm like, I'm not even going to give you a good job.
The thing is, they know, right? Like, deep down somewhere, they get it. And one of the problems I think we have in culture right now is that a lot of people want to get the accolades, or they want to have the feeling associated with victory or success or bravery or courage without any of the trial, challenges, or danger that is necessary for those values, those things to have any sort of meaning whatsoever. I can't give you a participation trophy for doing something truly, good and noble within a dangerous situation. You're going to need to actually, put yourself in those positions where something needs to be done and be willing to do it. Sacrifice is a necessary component of that. And so I think that's a big part of it. Little things. And again, I'm telling you how I did it, and I'm not suggesting this is how everyone needs to do it. But when it came to things like educating our kids went to, public schools for a while. Then we also homeschooled for most of it. And part of it was because we kind of got tired of, okay, this is the one size fits all top down approach toward, reading or education in general. We wanted our kids to have access to more options, and that allowed us to do that. But I remember talking to my kids about, college, and as they were getting prepared for that. And I remember looking at them like, just so you know, mom and dad do not owe you a college education. That doesn't mean we wanted help. That doesn't mean we want to set you up for success to do that if that's what you want to do. But you need to understand, it's not owed to you. And this is another thing that I think has become a real problem is we've got a lot of younger people, and every generation says that about every other generation, right? And I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming parents that teach this entitlement mentality to their kids that, gosh, you're so unique and special and wonderful that if you don't automatically get what you want on the first try, then it must be the fault of somebody else, whether it's your coach or your teacher, but gosh, it's not my fault, and it can't be your fault because you're just a little angel. No, your kids are little barbarians, and the ones that are responsible for civilizing them are parents. And if you do a good job raising your kids, you can be friends with them when you're adults. If you treat them like friends when they're kids, you're going to raise adults you don't want to be friends with, and neither will anybody else. And so
exactly, especially in that early growth period, the terrible twos, that kind of fostering development, and then again in their teenage years. I think you get some grace between, maybe 8 to 11. I think they get some grace there, but then when they become teenagers, they're little rat bags, and you've really got to, put the hammer down and tell them right for wrong, yes or no, and allow them to do some things and not others, but really be stern with it so that they understand, what they can get away with and what they can't, and who they are going to be when they're older. And for me, I'm only a new dad. I've got a 1.5-year-old. He's just there in the back, and for me, just going on this journey from 0 to 1.5 has just been a tremendous journey for me and my wife as well. It's just been unbelievable. But then seeing our nephews grow has been sensational, because we've been able to kind of see from the sidelines, the little gremlins kind of go through their little barbarian phases, and then as an uncle, I can rile them up and cause even more barbarianness in them, and then hand them back to the parents. And there's a bit of joy in that for me. But now with my children, I think, or with my son, I'm able to kind of, reflect and go, not who do I want him to be, but who I want him to show, how I want him to show up in this world as he's older. I don't care. He can choose any career or path that he wants to. But it's how do I want him to show up and be a human being on this earth? And I think that comes down from the relationships that I have with him, but also the role modeling that I put in front of him each and every single day. I was reading something just the other day, like just reading a book or doing a course isn't personal development. Actioning what you're learning is personal development. So so with Nate, it's like, cool, I can't just read a parenting book or just speak to individuals like yourself that have done great work. I need to unpack that information and then really implement it in my own life with my son to give my son the best chance of being a great human being as he ages.
No, I think that's spot on. Another thing I always, tell people is, one of the biggest things that you're teaching your kids is healthy relationships, and what their expectations should be, both for, their future spouse and what the expectations of them. And, I always try to be cognizant of the fact, again, don't always pull it off as well as I would like, but I always try to be cognizant of the fact that my daughters are learning how they should expect to be treated by their husbands by how they see me treat their mother, right? My son is learning how to respond to his future wife one day. They're also learning how a wife treats a husband. And again, there's so many faddish ideas out there now where you can always find some expert that is willing to tell you that thousands of years of human history are ridiculous because he did a study, right? But but the bottom line is that when kids watch their parents interact, that builds expectations within them. Like, do you like when you're not around your wife, are you running your wife down, right? Are you trash talking your wife to your friends or whatnot? Because sometimes your kids pick up on that stuff, even if it's just on the phone. Are you, are you respectful to your wife? Do you listen to her? Do you make eye contact? I'll never forget one of my kids, they were reaching those early teenage years and they're testing boundaries. And we've been really, blessed. We haven't had, any major issues with our kids so far. I got a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 14-year-old. But one of them was kind of pressing boundaries. And, Tina was getting on to him and she kind of rounded the corner and did one of these looks at her, and she didn't know I was standing right there. And she kind of bumps into me, looks up, and I looked at her and I said, "Don't you ever talk to my wife that way again." And that was intentional. I needed her to know that she wasn't just talking to her mom. She was talking to my wife. She was talking to the woman that I love. And as much as I love her as my child, that's the woman I made a vow to, that her and me against the world for it. That was it, man. Burn the ships, no exit strategy. I've got her back no matter what. And I didn't just do that so that she would know that she needs to be respectful for a multitude of reasons. The first of which is because Tina is owed her respect. Secondly, because I'll make sure, it happens, but also because I want her to know that that's the sort of expectation she should have out of her husband one day when they have kids, is that you don't use kids against the parents, right? It's you and her, and you love your kids, but you have to be a united front in order to help raise them and set those proper expectations.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if it's Ben Shapiro who says it, but it might be. But there's a lot of quotes on it where it's like, I love mum first, or I love my wife first before the children, because my wife or my husband, they're going to be with me forever. The children, they're going to go off and do their own thing. So we take care of that unit first, and if you take care of that unit, the kids get taken care of after that. But at this 1.5-year-old stage, it's like, I love my wife dearly and she loves me dearly, but we just love our son so deeply. It's just so, and so whenever I have these conversations, like, how can you love your spouse more than your child? Because your child is just, but again, I think there's differences between a 17-year-old and a 1-year-old that doesn't yet talk and back chat.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it, I don't think it's more as much as it is different. Because I remember my grandfather telling me, he goes, "Nick, you want your first interaction with the concept of unconditional love, have a child. And when you're holding that baby for the first time, it's like the whole world just shrinks into that one little body that you're holding right there. And you do anything, to protect them." So I don't think that it's this competition between, do I love my wife more? Do I love my kids more? As much as it is that I love them both. I love them differently, but they are owed different things from me. And my children are going to grow up one day and leave, right? And I'm no longer going to be responsible as their protector. I'm no longer going to be responsible as a provider. I'm always going to have that responsibility with my wife. But the other thing is, if you want to properly love your children, you have to properly love your spouse. To not properly love your spouse is to rob your children of an experience and an example that they desperately need in order to set those expectations for their future relationships. And so it's not as if one is lower on the love hierarchy. You have different responsibilities to each, and they need to be able to see that in the way that structure works. Because if you can't have that proper balance and that proper, whatever you want to call it, then you're not going to be able to give them everything that they need as your kids. So I would say that loving your wife and making sure that your wife are that strong unit, that is a part of properly loving your kids.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I wholeheartedly agree. So, Nick, I want to be really, really respectful of your time now, because you've given us a lot of it, and I really, really appreciate that. So, a couple of questions that we always like to ask. Now, one question before I go into that is, number one, what is the SAS like versus the Green Berets?
So Green Berets are more focused on unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. So when we go out and we go to war, we fight by, through, and with the local population. So SAS, from my understanding, and I don't want to piss off SAS guys watching this, my understanding from SAS guys is that SAS would be a little bit more like our maybe SEALs, Rangers, or even Delta, because what makes a Green Beret unique within the because everybody's unique within the special operations world for different reasons. And with Green Berets, it really is the counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare. We do other things as well, but that working by, through, and with the indigenous population is our primary function. Whereas SAS can certainly do that and have done it well. But I think their focus is probably a little bit more direct action, hostage rescue, counterterrorism, and they can do those other functions, but they weren't specifically designed to do them like Green Berets were.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, their special forces are called special forces for a reason, right? They have a speciality in a very particular skill set. Of course, they can do a lot, but they have a particular skill set. I know, I'm sure the SEALs, Deltas, and Rangers have their own particular skill set as well. So, okay, so two questions we always love to ask before we kind of close the podcast off. So, number one, obviously you're a fit dude, and obviously you're a dad. And during your progression, being a dad, you're at one point in the military, and then you left the military. So, as a dad, how did you stay fit? How did you stay in shape?
Oh gosh, they'll keep you on your toes. I've gotten to the point where I try to. For a while there, I wasn't going to the gym nearly as much as I should have. So I've tried to get to the point where I go to the gym regularly. I'm trying to eat a little bit better. Joining the military, I definitely consumed some alcohol, and for a while there, I smoked a pipe a lot. And my wife's been really good at trying to get me back into, hey, look, you're getting into your 40s now. Stuff breaks easier, doesn't heal as fast, and it's more expensive to fix. So, I try to stay regularly at the gym. I love working outside on the property where it's clear and brush. Picking up a chainsaw and disappearing for 2 hours is like therapeutic for me. Some people do yoga. I do chainsaws. But all of that really helps. That's kind of my regiment, for trying to stay healthy. Again, don't always do a great job, but trying to stay healthy. Yeah. And that's another thing.
Awesome.
That's another thing too. This is kind of a funny thing. Everyone kind of jokes around that, hey, I don't got to work out anymore. I got her, right? She married me. She's, I also think it's important that, like, I love my wife. I think my wife is beautiful. And, she married a guy that obviously she understands as I get older, it's going to be a little bit harder to stay fit. But, to the extent that I can stay in good shape for my wife, I want to do that. Like, I want her to be physically attracted to me, not just stuck with me. So, that's somebody asked, they said, I don't work out so my wife will love me. I work out because I love my wife. And to the extent that I can, I want her to be, physically still happy with the dude she married.
Yeah, hey, look, I love that. That's awesome. That's such a good answer. So here's our final question. This one puts a little people on their toes a little bit. So what is one question no one has ever asked you about? It could be being a dad, generating wealth, being a politician, running a business, balancing time, that you secretly wish someone had asked you?
Oh, gosh. Dang. This should come in show prep notes.
We like to keep you on the toes.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something that the issue is that because I'm in politics and because I do a lot of speaking and whatnot, I've been asked a ton of questions. I'm trying to think if there's one that I've, okay, I'll do this one, and I'm cheating a little bit if that's okay, because I did actually get asked this question, but it was kind of in a weird situation. I was on a plane and I was flying somewhere, and this young woman was sitting next to me, and she kept clicking the little light and it wasn't working. And I said, do you need to read something? We can switch seats. She goes, oh, thank you so much. I'm on my flight to a job interview. I just got married and it's really important. I've got to read this. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Let's switch and do your thing. And I said, by the way, congratulations on getting married. A lot of people like to trash talk marriage or act like life ends when you get married. It's the exact opposite. Life begins when you get married. So congratulations. And she looks at me and she goes, how long have you been married? And at that point, it was about 15 years. And she goes, how do you make it work? And I looked back, I said, do you really want to know? Now, keep in mind, this is on a plane, so she's probably thinking, oh, great, what's this psycho going to say next, right? I said, do you really want to know? She goes, yeah. I said, okay, just remember, you asked me. I said, so I've been married 15 years, 3 kids, 2 combat tours, 9 different moves. Like, we've been through all the stressful stuff. First 10 years of my marriage, I'd spent almost 5 years of it away from home. And I can tell you right now, I love my wife more than the day I married her, and we have a really strong relationship. I said, we have a biblical worldview of marriage. She goes, what do you mean by that? I said, well, it means a number of things. I said, one of the things it means is that I'm the head of the household. I have to take responsibility. And she goes, why does there need to be a head? I said, when you got married, was it forever or is this just a convenient tax arrangement? She goes, no, it was forever. I said, okay, when 2 people have a disagreement and they can't agree on the right course of action, do you split up or does somebody take responsibility for making that decision? She goes, well, I guess somebody takes responsibility. I said, here's the other side of this that nobody ever talks about and that men especially don't talk about, and they need to. Me being the head of the household does not mean my way or the highway, does not mean I'm some sort of glorified tyrant that gets to rule over my wife. The biblical definition of what it means to be the head of the household means that her safety, her security, her comfort, my children's safety and security comes before me, all the way up to and including my life for theirs. The moment we got married, she became the one forever. She became the one. And she needs to know that she can count on me, depend upon me. And in every situation, I'm going to try to find, some sort of compromise that we both agree on that we can go forward on. But in the event that we can't agree, at this point, almost 24 years in marriage, I can count on one hand the number of times that's happened. She needs to have faith that when I do have to make that decision, that I'm doing it because I genuinely believe that it is the best possible decision for the most important people in my life, and that is her and my children. And again, that means up to and including me sacrificing me for them. They have now become more important than my own life. And if you can actually embrace that and you can live it out in a truly loving way, that will resonate throughout your entire marriage, and it will build a sense of trust and communication and attraction and everything else that you can only have within that sort of secure environment. That just makes it the most wonderful thing you will experience this side of heaven. So, again, I cheated a little bit there. I was asked that question, but I wish I got asked it more.
No, look, that's an amazing answer. Obviously, well thought out, and I love how I love how you articulate that. And I think it's so true, right? It doesn't, and it's true in any engagement, any relationship. There needs to be someone that is the final decision maker if shit hit the fan and an agreement can't be met. Someone needs to take charge and be like, all right, cool, I'm going to take the charge, right or wrong. Are we in agreement that I'll take the responsibility if it's right or wrong? And it's like, cool, let's go ahead and take it together. So that's fantastic. So there's still, even though you're ahead, there's still an agreement there made together.
Absolutely.
Which is sensational. Yeah. Nick, I think that's a fantastic place to end this podcast. Thank you so much for jumping on the show. Now, Nick, if people want to learn a little bit more about you and find out a little bit more about what you do, how can they get in touch with you? Well, how can they find you?
If you just Google Nick Freitas, it'll come up. We're on, obviously, Instagram and Reels, Facebook, Twitter. We also have our 2 shows that we do pretty regularly, Making the Argument, which is every Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's largely political, also some cultural conversations that we do, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And then we have another show we do called the Why Minutes, which are like 3-minute breakdowns where we kind of search for that aha moment. And we do a lot of historical stuff on there, some economic stuff, some philosophy stuff, and we have a really good time with it. But, again, people can find me there. And then I'm also, we never intended this, but I'm kind of known for our TikTok and Instagram reels where I'll say something and I'll take a sip of my coffee, and I usually have a different coffee mug every time we do it. And it's kind of become a thing, but yeah, that's where people can find me.
Yeah, he's got a sip with Nick, so that'll
Yeah.
be good. So yeah, I like it. I like it. And look, yeah, I mean, you can find him on the news as well. He's occasionally on the news there, jumping on there too. So all good. Nick, thank you very much for jumping on the show, man. Really, really appreciate your time.
No, thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome, man. See you next time.
That's it from us on this episode on the Dad Bub Show. If you want to find out a little bit more about us, head on over to www.dadbub.com. Until next time, see you next week.